Inversion. Word order is a very important syntactical problem in many languages, particularly in English, since it has fixed word order. Stylistic inversion, if we simply put it, is a reversed word order, any change which does not influence the meaning, but is only aimed at emphasis is called a stylistic inversion. In spite of fixed word order, which is characteristic to the English language, inversion should not be regarded as a violation of the norms of standard English. This stylistic device aims at attaching logical stress or additional emotional coloring to the surface meaning of the utterance. Typical example of the stylistic inversion is often called locative inversion, as in the following example. Into the room walked a woman, for your gods are not gods but man-made idols. The following patterns of stylistic inversion are most frequently met in both English prose and English poetry. The attribute is placed after the word it modifies, for example, with fingers weary and worn. The predicate is placed before the subject, for example, a good, generous prey it was. The adverbial modifier is placed at the beginning of the sentence, for example, my dearest daughter, at your feet I fall. A famous example is the beginning of Milton's Paradise Lost. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us, and regain the blissful seat, sing heavenly muse. Emily Dickinson was fond of arranging words outside of their familiar order. For example, she writes, "Yet know I how the heather looks, and yet certain am I of the spot." So instead of saying, "Yet I know and yet I am certain," she reverses the usual order and shifts the emphasis to the more important words. In these lines, she calls attention to the swiftness of her knowledge and the power of her certainty. Similarly, in Love in Jeopardy, there is a peculiar but logical inversion. Humbert Wolff wrote, "Here by the rose tree they planted once, of love in jeopardy an Italian bronze." Wolff was describing an old statue, and he wanted to suggest an old-fashioned effect. Had he written, "Once upon a time they erected or planted a bronze figure named Love in Jeopardy or Love in Danger next to a rose tree," it would have seemed commonplace, and the poet would have lost the quaintness of the picture as well as the arresting oddity of the phrasing. So this is one of the reasons why writer chooses poetry rather than prose. By a trick of a word or the turn of a phrase, he arrests the attention of the reader and makes him see old things in a new light. Even the very shape of a poem says, "Stop, look, and listen." And now about suspense. Suspense is a compositional device which is realized through the separation of the predicate from the subject by deliberate introduction between them of a clause or a sentence. Suspense is a feeling of uncertainty and anxiety about the outcome of certain actions, most often referring to an audience's perceptions in a dramatic work. It is not exclusive to fiction, though it may operate in any situation where there is a lead up to a big event or a dramatic moment, with tension being a primary emotion felt as part of the situation. An audience expects something bad to happen because they have or they believe they have a superior perspective on events in the drama's hierarchy of knowledge. Yet they are powerless to intervene to prevent it from happening. Alfred Hitchcock, who is called the master of suspense, once wrote, "Terror is often accompanied by suspense in the unfolding of a thrilling narrative, Or, to put it another way, a story which gives the reader a feeling of terror necessarily contains a certain measure of suspense. One of the critics says that, known throughout the years as the master of suspense, Hitchcock kept viewers on the edge of their chairs with tales of mystery, murder, and mayhem. In literature, suspense is a compositional device which is realized through the separation of the predicate from the subject by deliberate introduction between them of a clause or a sentence. That the reader's interest is held up. This device is typical of oratoric style. For example, "Mankind," says a Chinese manuscript, "which my friend was obliging enough to read and explain to me for the first 70,000 pages at their mid-raw." So sentences of this type are called periodic sentences or periods. Their function is to create suspense, to keep the reader in a state of uncertainty and expectation.